everyone, here I am today again to do a video. This one is going to be kind of the origins of Smith, Alberta, the town that I live in. So welcome everybody, and here we go. So first of all, I live down here. Smith is actually located right at the junction of the Lesser Slave and Athabasca River. So first off the get-go, way back in the fur trading days, and I'm sure long before that, this was a classic route of water travel. So the only outlet from Lesser Slave Lake is the Lesser Slave River that kind of runs down here and joins the Athabasca where my blue dot is. So every time I travel over our Yellow Smith River Bridge, which was actually built in the early 40s as part of the Alaska Highway, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers built that bridge. I think of all of the travel on the river that went before that. There would have been in the wintertime dog teams or horses and sleds, and in the summer there was also a whole pile of traffic. So this is Guillaume Desjardins' dog team. This picture was actually taken in Edmonton. And at this point in the winter of 1894, the Edmonton Bulletin was reporting that generally the only dog teams that were being used in Edmonton were coming in from the Lesser Slave Lake region, the Lesser Slave Lake Post. So I'm going to back up a notch. And the Lesser Slave Lake Post was located up where our Capitalino First Nation, ouch, I just whacked myself on the head, and Sucker Creek First Nation are. Nothing like a redneck pointer trying to attack you in the middle of a presentation. But hey, worse things have happened. And I'm gonna mention Dog Island, and you can just barely make it out as a little dot on the map there. Okay, back to what I was doing. So Guillaume Desjardins was a Métis fur trader. He was one of the first fur traders. But when you actually read the names of all of these people, which I don't have in this presentation, they went from missionaries to Hudson's Bay people to, it was just like such a wide variety of people, and one would assume they were all traveling together because they're all starting in Edmonton and heading home at the same time. And I talked about water travel. Basically, you built a boat out of whatever you had and away you went if you were by yourself. Not sure what date this picture is or whom it's from, but if anybody ever needs references of the materials that I show on these presentations, get a hold of me and I'll pull it out of my files for you. So, single canoes, like the one I just showed you. There was also the Voyager canoes that generally took about 6 people, and they carried a certain amount of weight, but as that fur trade and more people moved in, you needed more goods and more fur was coming out, so the boats got a little bit bigger. This one was taken at Athabasca Landing. These are called scows or York boats, and I've never quite figured out what the difference between the two is. But you can even tell if you look right here, there's a canoe on a boat. So I'll give you an idea of the size of them. They were generally 30 to 40 feet long and 8 to 10 feet wide. And if I'm correct, I think they carried 20,000 pounds. It was an enormous amount of weight for the flat bottom boats. And a lot of the river boat men were indigenous or Métis. That was one of their forms of employment. So then things kept on growing bigger. So the next thing you're up against is the steamboats. So they started making these shallow keel steamboats to run the rivers. And this is one of the northern transportation companies owned by Jim Cornwalls. This one actually would have came right at the river junction and gone underneath the Yellow Bridge. So, but when you were looking at the scows in the previous picture, maybe this much. Now look at all of the goods they've got stacked on that thing. I mean, they even packed animals on there. So, and then of course upstairs you've got your ladies in their lovely little finery going north. So, yeah, it was quite the adventure, I'm sure. Well, you may have noticed that I said steamboats. There were camps all along the river, and specifically what they were cutting was the wood to feed the boats. So the boats would pull up on the shore and load them, get loaded to make the next leg of the journey. So sure, it kept the brush clean, but I have no idea how much wood they used. But this was a photo called the Jack Pine Camp out of the Provincial Archives. And if you want to look it up there, it has these guys' names too, I believe. Well, that all changed with the coming of the railway. And this is a picture of the railway still in town. And I'm waiting for it to go by. But I always try to remember Smith would not exist without the railway. And for whatever reason, the railway tracks go through either side of Smith. It like circles the entire little hamlet. So I have no idea who did that engineering maneuver, but somebody did. So this is a picture of one of the first steam engines within the first year or two, plus the station house at Smith. And at one time, Smith, the station house they didn't find the funding to keep it for any sort of historical point, so it got torn down. And if I was standing in Smith at the back end of the schoolyard looking directly ahead, I don't even know which direction that is, I would be looking at the railway yards. That's where it all was. There was a water tower and a roundhouse, and we were the first divisional point, which is why we got called Smith, because of who the engineer was. Well, the Mirror Landing, which I'll show you in a bit, was overtaken, I'll say, by Smith, even though they're two different locations. And the point why they didn't use Mirror Landing, in my opinion anyways, was because they could sell town sites. So the Edmonton, Dunvegan and British Columbia Railway, which I'll call ED&BC, and I can never remember the different saying for that, but it's got something about engineered and badly constructed railway. So whatever the D is, it's not a good word. So this guy's name is Rathbone Smith, and that's why we're called Smith, after this dude. He was the general manager and chief engineer of the ED&BC Railway at the time the tracks were going northward. So in today's terms, it would be like being named after the CEO of WestJet. He was an important fellow in terms of transportation. So, or, I don't know, maybe we could be called Elon Musk Alberta or something, because of, yeah, he had a lot going on. So we were actually privileged to be named after him. When I say a lot going on, that's because he was responsible, this is Edmonton down here, for laying all that track. And we're right here, by the way, and the first divisional point. Side story, don't have any slides to support this. The tracks were originally supposed to go to Gerard, also known as Lesser Slave Lake Post, Capuano, Sucker Creek First Nation, as it come along here. And the next divisional point was McLennan. The reason why that was is somebody took a sample of water, because steam engines run off of good water. They want to get the best water so as not to corrode the machinery. But the guy broke the sample jar. And when he broke the sample jar, he was on a boat going back to Edmonton to take these samples in, and somewhere out in the middle of Lesser Slave Lake, he took another sample jar, dipped it over the edge, and said it was from McLennan. And that's why Gerard wasn't on the tracks, and the town died. Gerard was once one of the busiest communities in northern Alberta when it was a Lesser Slave Lake post. So, killed that entirely. So why is the store called Mirror Landing General Store, or why was it? We now have new owners and it's Lucky 7. Well, I've already mentioned Mirror Landing, and Mirror Landing was the first community of, I'll say first European community, because I'm sure it's not the first community. So Smith is down in here, Mirror Landing was located right there, and it's a good time to say it is private land, so please do not trespass. But the tracks, the railway tracks came here, and there's our Yellow River Bridge to give you a I don't know, landmark, I guess. So when you're actually standing on or driving across the Yellow River Bridge, you can see this island, so it kind of, you can line it up visually that way as well. Now, Mirror Landing was a really big town, especially for its day, and I got 2 points on this map I want to show to you. This is the first one right here. You can see there's kind of a little group up in the clearing, and over here as well a line. This would have been the first point the steamboats pulled up to, and this would have been second based on the photographs. As it grew, they needed a second one. I don't think this is the boat that I showed you in the picture, but it could very well be based on the smokestacks. This one I think has 2, the other one had 1. Northern Transportation Company had 3 boats, and they all kind of came to this point. But this is the first dock that I showed you. This would have been Captain Barber's house, the guy that homesteaded the Mirror Landing town site, and it was also a telegraph line. Side story, in 1910 there was forest fires raging on the Smith side of the river, and the ladies that were operating the telegraph office felt pretty confident it could not jump the Athabasca River, and their first indication that it did is when a burning tree fell on the roof of the telegraph office. And things got pretty exciting after that, I'm sure. So as the community grew, that house I showed you, Captain Barber's house, is actually off screen that way. This is the second dock, and this is a warehouse, Athabasca Forwarding Company warehouse. So you can tell, even if you were in downtown Main Street today in Smith, this was quite large, a bit larger. Now I'm going to get a few more close-up pictures for you. And I mean, look at how they just obviously left the prow of a boat somewhere hanging out on this, like, what's with that, right? Anyway, so there's a closer up view. This was the pool hall. This was a drugstore. And then many of you know that I've been entrusted with some of the artifacts from Mirror Landing. I have some needlework and silverware and other things that were documented as being from Mirror Landing. That was from the Holt family, and they had kind of a business right here. Way up over here, that's a rooming house. But I want one to show you one more. What a mud hole, eh? So going farther up the hill, so that's the rooming house. I can tell by the doorway. But back in old communities, they all had blacksmiths. This is the blacksmith shop, and I can kind of tell by some of the equipment around. But if you can see that guy, like right there, look how big he is.
Oh, look at everyone else.
Yeah, like he was a monster. You wouldn't want to tackle him in a dark alley. But, and these are all, as far as I can tell, it almost looks like there's a little track laid here to move these things up and down. I don't know. I haven't figured out what this is. I need to get on the original photograph with a magnifying glass and check that out. Because Mirror Landing was reported to have street lights and stuff. So, obviously not in this picture, but after they were incorporated as Port Cornwall, they were. So, there we go, Port Cornwall. When the railway was coming, the businessmen of Mirror Landing fully expected that the railway would be placed across the river from Mirror Landing. And if you back up to that picture of Mirror Landing, it was across the Lesser Slave, not the Athabasca. And that was actually surveyed as a town site. And they incorporated it as a village, whereas before it was just kind of nothing, I guess, other than everybody knew it was Mirror Landing. But when they did, they incorporated under the name of Port Cornwall. So Port Cornwall is James Kennedy Cornwall, also known as Peace River Jim, also known as Apostle of the North, but all of the steamboats, the Northern Transportation Company, that's his company. So they were advertising in the Grand Prairie Herald as a place where they would stock the goods so you wouldn't have to ship it from Edmonton, saving you a week of time. It was going to be a warehouse town. And then boom, the railway decided to build elsewhere. But it was interesting because they had good restaurants, affordable rooms, pool rooms, bowling alleys, and shooting galleries to provide entertainment for travelers. So I don't know if a bowling alley of today is the same as a bowling alley back then, but that's kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. And shooting galleries, I wonder how much lead's out there. So yeah, it was quite the place. And then when Smith came along, instantly gone, like 2 or 3 years. There's a letter in the provincial archives that the municipal affairs is sending a letter to the village of Port Cornwall saying they're not filing their reports or whatever, and in pencil on the outside somebody's written nobody's there anymore.
Wow.
Yeah, so before the bridge, how'd you get to the other side of the river? You did it by a ferry, and there were actually several of them here. So, I think that this is right, I think this is like the River Hill. So the bridge would be to the right-hand side of the ferry. So if you come to Smith today and you're driving towards the river bridge from the Smith side, you'd look to your left and there's a trail that goes down to the river edge, and that was actually the ferry landing. So there's, again, on private property, but you can go find a grave site about 100 yards west of that, where a family were coming up, a Mennonite family were coming up from South America, and he couldn't read English, so as they were going down the curves, he thought there was a bridge lower on the water, and didn't realize that it went straight into the river. There was no ferry there, so he cranked his wheel, and his wife and child were ejected and passed away. So the community members helped bury them nearby there. So anyway, but this was not the first ferry. There were also ferries down by Mirror Landing. So, and who built the bridge? I already said that earlier. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And I think it's a beautiful bridge. We've been promised that there's going to be a replacement bridge because this one's past its life. I would have liked to have seen something happen with that bridge for its historical context, but apparently that might not happen. So, oh well, my dream. So here's another confusing bit about our area in Smith. And this one, we have a provincial park out at Fawcett Lake, and that provincial park actually used to be the site of Swanson Lumber Company, which employed German prisoners of war during World War II. So it was not always called Fawcett Lake. It was actually called Fawcett Lake after one of the surveyors, and before that it was known as Moose Lake. However, on a map, the river that exits it is known as Fawcett River, but when you get down to the Lesser Slave River, everybody knows it still as a Moose River, and even the marker said it was the Moose River. So, but it's used often as a swimming hole. Kids are still swimming there. Those are my grandkids. I'll go fast just because. However, that Moose River Bridge that we all now drive across and some people swim under used to look like that. So.
That's terrifying.
That's terrifying. Yeah. When I was doing this presentation to the kids some of the kids from school, we were like, can you imagine driving a log truck across that? And the whole was like, no! I'd be afraid to walk across this thing.
Yeah.
Side story. So my husband tells this one. The Yellowsmith River Bridge. He lived on the other side, so to come to school they had to take a school bus across the bridge. Same thing happens today, except for at one point in time, they were fixing the planks on the bridge, and in order to get across, the kids to school, they would pull the bus down, and they had to walk across a couple of 2x12 planks and get to the other side and get picked up again. Like, if you tried to do that today, people would have a fit.
Wow.
Yeah. It would be like walking across this, but worse. If that could be worse. Yeah. Anyways, carrying on. This is Fawcett Lake, right where the prisoner of war camp is. Is it? Yeah, I think so. So, it was a nice photo. Whoops, yep. I saw something flash there. I thought I missed something. So that photo was taken up in here, and these are the pilings left over from the camp. So I've had a lot of people like, why are there concrete pilings out there? They used to get, they were called jack ladders, and that's what supported the jack ladders. And I'm gonna go back a notch. Whoops, wrong way. So this one is near the boat launch at the provincial park. And if you're standing at the boat launch and you look to your right, there's kind of a clearing, and there's still a sawdust pile there from the German prisoners of war, and others like before and after, from when it was actually a lumber camp. So kind of cool when you go over and wander around. There's a couple of bits and pieces of buildings out there too. Okay, so German prisoners of war. I've tried to find these guys quite frequently. And I have on some occasions. So this is Horst Seifert, that was on a German submarine, and actually the POWs that came here primarily were from the first two subs sunk in World War II, the first two German subs. And he came back, was it Horst? And others came back to actually live back in Canada. They didn't really, they loved the country, and this guy, yeah, there's where he is in the story, he got hurt. So something to do with a saw or something. So they hustled him into Smith to see the nurse, and he had to stay. They couldn't come across the ferry or anything because the river was either freezing up or unfreezing, so the water wasn't good. You couldn't get across any other way. So they brought him across the railway bridge on a handcar, and it ended up that him and his German comrade stayed in Smith while he recuperated, and they were at Duncan's cabins. And I haven't verified this, but I highly suspect Duncan's cabins are where the store is now. Anyways, that was also the time when the U.S. Army was coming through towards the Alaska Highway. So Horst Seifert is sitting on the deck of Duncan Cabins, and a baseball game starts, and he said it was one of the most profound things in his life. Here he has his German comrade, an African-American truck driver with the U.S. Army, an American family, some Métis and Indigenous fellows, all playing a game of baseball in Smith, Alberta, while on the other side of the world, the same people would have been killing each other.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think that's just an amazing story how, you know, we can in fact all work together. This is an interesting picture because when I first heard about the floating camp in Fawcett Lake where they kept the prisoners overnight, I thought it was for security. Stick them out in the middle of the water and, you know, nobody's going to get away. But then my father-in-law told me that one of these prisoners of war would swim from the camp to the shore every day and back again at night. So, like, well, that's obviously not good security. And what I hear, half the guards were didn't have guns, or if they did have guns, they didn't have ammunition. So regardless, these guys were reasonably happy for prisoners. Why they did that was for mosquito control.
Oh.
Now that makes sense.
Yep.
So
Especially here.
good sense. And here's just another angle of that camp. Like they even got boats pulled up here. And, they had quite a little operation going on there. So Peace River Trail, if you've ever been down it. This sign, you probably can't read it, but it says Athabasca one way, landing one way, and Mirror Landing the other. So that was the overland trail used if you weren't going by the water route. So you'd go from Edmonton to Athabasca and across that trail to Mirror Landing where Smith is now. And now it's a multi-use trail. And I'm not sure, I think they were doing some repairs to it, but you'd have to check with, on their website, Alberta TrailNet, I believe. Could be wrong on that, but to check the status of the trails. And I just have to go forward, I'm sure. Yeah, okay. So these are artifacts that my friend Zolt Dobre has found in the general area, most of them right by Smith or up the Lesser Slave River. And he is a guy with a metal detector, and he's very serious about asking for permission to go on to private land. So that's a hint for anybody else that might want to go metal detecting. So anyways, I thought it was really interesting. This is actually a net anchor for fishing. I don't know about these particular pieces of cutlery, but he has found HPC cutlery in the river. I think he told me that this train was found underneath the Athabasca River Bridge. But what I found really interesting in this, and it's hard to see, if you're familiar with jingle dancing at powwows, these are homemade jingles. Somebody handcrafting their jingles for their jingle dress. That's cool.
Yeah.
So, when I was mentioning the Peace River Trail, this is what they call an oxbow point, and it's recognizable because of its Mickey Mouse ears. That's my knowledge of archaeology right there. And I learned it because of this piece, but it was used on an atlatl, but because of its shape and what it is, it's dated that that trail would have been used 4,100 to 4,500 years ago. So when we say our land acknowledgements in traditional lands, it sounds like a bunch of carrying on, and it's sometimes monotonous in my opinion. They need more heartfelt stuff. This, by the way, is my land acknowledgement that I can tell you with definitive that the indigenous people were there at least 4,500 years ago. However, most archaeologists agree that in Alberta, 10,000 years, but a lot of these sites, like this was pulled out of the first test hole. So, but a lot of the sites like Dog Island or whatever, they've never been explored comprehensively.
Yeah.
So I would like to see the government do more of that, or somebody. So, no, great people. I'm saying 3 times services, that's who they were, but now it's Ember Archaeology. So, yeah. And when I said it's on an atlatl, that point went on one of these throwing spears, not a bow and arrow.
No.
So this is me actually with Ember Archaeology people, checking them out, and I don't know, might have been able to kill a rabbit, but a moose was totally beyond my capabilities. I'll tell you that right now. That was fun. If you ever have the chance to do that, I would recommend that. So the other thing that's kind of different between Mirror Landing and Smith is that the river between the two, the Athabasca River, divides Treaty 6 and Treaty 8 territory. So when in 1899 the commissioners were coming up for the negotiations of Treaty 8, they came from Athabasca and went underneath where our river bridge is today. Like, that stuff is like, wow, I wish I could just have a movie camera fast. So I'm trying to see, but to give you a rough size of the area that Treaty 8 covers, we're right there. So Lesser Slave Lake is that little spot there, which is 100 kilometers long. That's a pretty big space.
Yes. What lake is that at the?
At the very top,
Yeah. That's at the Great Slave.
that's a Great Slave Lake, yeah. And if I can read the map right, I think this is Lake Athabasca.
Okay.
So Fort Chip would be right in there. Yeah.
Huge.
Fort Chippewan, for those that aren't privy to our shortened versions of Northern Alberta places. And most of you know I'm kind of vocal about Treaty 8, and I actually just went recently to the recognition of the signing of the 125th anniversary of Treaty 8 at Sucker Creek Reserve. But I do want to say, just because, when the commission came up and throughout the negotiations, it was heavily put across that we should all be working together. And so I wanted to show you a picture of a Treaty 8 medal. This one from Goipers River. If you see the picture, even on the medal that was given to chiefs, that's exactly what that tells people. And I think we've lost that part of our understanding of treaty. So I'll just keep reinforcing it. That's easy. Okay. This is something some people know and some people don't. Smith is right up here. Now that everybody knows where I live. But this area in here that we call the Soda Flats Trails was actually the original road to Hondu. So, before the highway came through. So lots of people, well, anybody that wanted to go from Smith to Hondu or beyond, went that way on one of these trails. Well, they're primarily sand hills in there. Like it's, you know, now people have turned some of it into mud bogs, but for the most part, there's a lot of sand. And this is a picture of it flooding. And it's not the first time it's happened. This is also a more recent picture of the Soda Flat Trails flooding. So I can't remember the year, but way back in the 30s, 40-ish, it also flooded. And so several bright guys decided to get together. They were out there like, what are we going to do about this? And anybody that's ever tried to drain mud puddle will know you just start a little runoff ditch, sink your shovel in the ground, and make a place for the water to escape. So they did. I think there's 3 or 4 of them. Some of them were my husband's uncles. And in that sand, they made their little ditch, except for the sand started eroding away, and pretty soon they were running for their lives, and trees were crashing about, and I do not have a good picture of it, but if anybody has been to the canyon on the Soda Creek, that is a result of draining the road to Hondu. Makes a great lookout now, anyways. So if you didn't know about that area, there you go. And if you're a quad enthusiast and come to the area, now you know. So, anyways, that is about it. So, I hope you all have learned something new, and I need to say this, if you're watching, I am desperately trying for my August presentation. I have been given the opportunity to go down in the Calgary area. There was a gentleman that used to live in Smith, and he passed away in 1978. His name was Charlie Passmore, and he was a camera and movie enthusiast. So he had a video camera of the day and a projector, and he has 10 reels of film around Smith, primarily to do with the railway. So from what I understand, the roundhouse, the steam engines, the station house, all of that is on those reels. So I am looking for sponsors to go down there, pick it up, and bring it home, and with any luck at all, it will be my August presentation. And because I want to open it up to the community, I may not be doing it in the craft sale, collectible sale building, which was formerly Char's Cafe or the Wildcat Saloon. I will put tickets up on Facebook so people can register, and may end up doing it in the hall. But if I can successfully do that in the middle of August, I would also like to make it available for the fall fair. So anybody wants to chip in on that, my email is melandsheila@gmail.com. melandsheila@gmail.com. So, and you can ask me questions there too. So anyways, have a nice day, and we will see you later.